My good friend, Mr. Rajya, was sitting on the dais. Friends, I first met Mr. Rajya exactly 25 years ago. And it was during the process of preparation of the Common Minimum Program of the United Front government. And coincidentally, the third member of that three-person group is also present with us today, Jairam Ramesh. My friendship with Rajya continued, and Mr. Yechuri, Rajya and I were destined for a second Common Minimum Program in 2004. So you can imagine how much of trouble I've had to go through over all these years, dealing with Comrade Rajya in Ajoy Bhavan and dealing with Comrade Yechuri in Gopal Bhavan. But it is a friendship that has endured. We've had our differences, we've had our arguments, but it has always been arguments based on very close personal friendship and a very close association on various issues, of which perhaps the closest association was when the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act was being formulated in 2004 and 2005. I often mention this fact that Comrade Yechuri and Comrade Rajya have more influence in the Congress party than in their own respective parties. And it's true. It shows the power of their thinking. It shows the respect and admiration which people in parties other than the Communist Party have to these gentlemen. I was particularly struck by the interview that Comrade Rajya has given in this book. I have had the good fortune or misfortune of listening to all the speeches of Mr. Rajya. See, Mr. Rajya is unique in Parliament because for the 12 years he was in Parliament, much of the time he was the only MP of his party. Now, in Parliament, every party gets a chance to speak on every issue. So Mr. Rajya is probably the record for having spoken on every issue in Parliament in the 12 years as he was MP. So I have heard all his speeches. But what I had not read was the interview. And I think this interview is remarkable, really remarkable, because it traces the history of political movements in the erstwhile Madras presidency. And I am so glad that Comrade Rajya has brought to our attention two individuals who are today forgotten in Indian political history, Mr. Srimaravelu and Jivanandam, who were the two giants of the communist movement in southern India. Unfortunately, other giants from Bengal and Kerala have overshadowed these two gentlemen. But I think Mr. Srimaravelu and Mr. Jivanandam deserve to be rescued from obscurity. And I am so glad that Comrade Rajya has spoken about them. I am also very glad, in many ways, my good friend Mr. Tichi Shiva is not here. I wish he was here when I said this. I am so glad that Comrade Rajya has pointed to the fact that much of the foundations of modern Tamil Nadu in social welfare, in economic growth, were laid during pre-Dravidian movement. And he is singled out Mr. Kamraj for his contributions. And I want to applaud him because again, this is a name that we tend to normally forget or take for granted. We often associate midday meal scheme with MGR. People forget that it was Mr. Kamraj who introduced the midday meal scheme in the mid-50s. Or Panchayati Raj. Long before Mr. Manishankar Iyer discovered Panchayati Raj, Mr. Kamraj had actually implemented Panchayati Raj in the then state of Madras. So this interview of his I found very, very educative. And a third issue that he deals with, which Bhasha also mentioned, is the relationship of the communist movement and the Ambedkarite movement in India. And this is one of the great paradoxes and puzzles of Indian politics. Why there was no greater convergence between the Ambedkarite movement and the communist movement. And Comrade Rajya has dealt with this issue. He has taken this issue head on and he has tried to explain why there is this perception that these are parallel movements. Although there is much, you cannot be pro-Ambedkar and be anti-left. It is a striking sentence that he uses in the interview, that anybody who is an admirer of Dr. Ambedkar has necessarily to be leftist or left in their social and economic thinking. So thank you, Mr. Rajya, for inviting me. The people you have gathered on the dais reflects your friendship, and I would be failing in my duty if I did not mention the pillar in your life, Annie Rajya. Sometimes I would come to your house more to meet her than to meet you. But Annie Rajya played a very important role in activist movements, and she, in many ways, was one of the conscience keepers of the programs that were introduced during the UPA. And I know the amount of trouble that she took, both on the Right to Information Act and the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. So thank you, Annie, also for being part of Comrade Raja's life. We miss Comrade Raja in Parliament. He has a special equation with Mr. Venkaiah Naidu, because as he said, he would be given 2 minutes, but he would speak for 20 minutes. And Mr. Venkaiah Naidu always used to say, he is Raja, but he always speaks the language of the Praja. And that is why Mr. Raja used to be given all the time, he used to be given special treatment. And I have seen even the Prime Minister, the current Prime Minister, who doesn't have a good word to say about anybody outside in his party, recognize Mr. Raja and very fondly refer to Mr. Raja. So I'm delighted to be here. I wish him great success. We are all in the same boat. We are sailing in the same boat. The Congress, the CPI, the CPM, we are all trying to find a way forward. And I'm sure that in the months ahead, we will, in the various elections that are going to be held, we will find common ground and we will pool our resources together to rid this country of the BJP rule. The fact that Mr. Arun Jaitley could tell Mr. Tuji Shiva that Shiva, he didn't know that Shiva was a pre-Dravidian god. Shiva was a tribal god. So it shows you the homogenization that the BJP would like to bring about, and even Mr. Jaitley, one of the more sophisticated and knowledgeable figures in the BJP, didn't know who or what Shiva represents in Indian philosophy. He's anything but a Brahminical god. Thank you.